Good morning. It is 10 a.m. on Sunday, April 19th, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. And today is Sunday, so we are continuing our rewatch of The Legend of Korra with episode 3, The Revelation. So, the first two episodes have largely been table setting because obviously we have to introduce a lot of new things, right? We have to introduce the changes to the world in the time that has passed. We have to introduce our new avatar. We have to introduce her new mentor, Tenzin, and establish the basics of what has happened in the time since The Last Airbender ended. And then, of course, in episode 2, we're establishing the pro bending sport. We meet our some of our additional leads in Mako and Bolin. But in those two episodes, we had only had just the tiniest peek at what the larger series threat might be. We had, of course, Korra's encounter with the Equalist protester in episode 1, which we didn't necessarily know that was going to be tied into the big threat, but certainly it was a notable world-building detail. And then, of course, we had our first sighting of Amon at the end of the first episode, but we didn't really know what his deal was, right? So now it's time to establish what the big deal is. So we begin the episode with, Korra and Mako and Bolin, as the Fire Ferrets, have made it, they've qualified to enter the tournament for the professional bending. But they discover there's an entry fee and they are short of cash because even the prize money that they want for that last match just goes to pay off of all of Mako and Bolin's previous debts and rent and so on. And so they are cash poor. And I can't help but think that, I don't know, perhaps it's not useful to get too far into it, but as a tournament, it does just seem a little bit unusual that you would have to have an entry fee for the tournament, but that there wouldn't be anyone. Well, I don't know. Maybe the thing is that theoretically you could get a sponsor or a patron willing to put that fee up for you, but it also may be that the people who would be willing to do that are people you don't want to have debts to, and maybe that's part of what's going on there, but it's not really brought up in terms of that aspect of it. The point is just that they need the money. But it just raises the question of, if they can't get the money together, what does the tournament do? Does it offer the spot to the next team down? On the ladder? It's not clear. Doesn't really matter anyway. So immediately Bolin suggests that their little pet fire ferret, Pabu, could do tricks, and he could basically busk at the train station. And he proceeds to go do that, even though that idea is dismissed. But in the meantime, Mako goes and works a shift at the power station, where he and a bunch of other firebenders are bending lightning into the power supply. And I love that happens, because it's simultaneously a really interesting world-building detail to establish the firebenders as a means to generate power and electricity. And we know from later in the season that it's not the only way to do that, but it's certainly, given people's ability in this setting to bend lightning, it makes sense that you could try to use that for for a purpose. And it's fascinating because it's simultaneously a job that feels very blue collar, right? Looks like it's hard work. It's not clear how much he actually got paid for it. He seems to think that it was a fair amount, but it's not. We never established is it enough for them to enter the tournament? Or maybe would be after a few more sessions of it or something. But at the same time, when we think about that in the context of the Equalists, we realize, sure, it's maybe a blue collar job, not a lot of glamour to it, but it's also a job that a non-bender just couldn't do, right? So that's another point of resentment that non-benders might have. And it's one of those things where you just kind of have to, I think it's important to recognize that even though the Equalists are clearly the bad guys in this series, I think the series wants us to understand that they have some valid points. You know, we essentially believe that their tactics are wrong and scary and hurt people, but that their complaints are not invalid, right? Like there's some, they have some justifiable complaints about how that all goes. You know, there's sort of this, you know, it's not even really class. It layers on in the fantasy a different sort of tier, because you certainly in this setting have rich people and poor people, so there's class in that sense. And after all, like, you know, Bolin and Mako are benders and they're down and outs. But you also have this a thing of like some people can bend and some people can't. And although we can say Bolin and Mako are poor, they're not rich. You know, they don't have anything. They're not upper class. They're lower class too. But the truth is, they have advantages being benders that they would not if they weren't benders, right? And so that just means that it's a degree of privilege that the show is interested in examining, which I think is kind of cool. And, you know, obviously that theme is going to continue. But so what we learned though is that Bolin over at, you know, the train station is busking, and this is where we get our first clue that like the guy in the fancy clothes with the fancy car drives up, and Bolin knows him. He's clearly ganged up and you know, or mobbed up, I suppose, and you know, offers Bolin a bunch of money to go work security. But we're definitely told, you know, Bolin is like, Mako told me to stay away from you guys, but it's so much money, we need the money. And so he goes off with him, and that's the last time we see him until later. So, you know, in the meantime, Korra has been making a lot of progress in her training. We see her successfully navigating that airbending, you know, spinning blades trial. She's clearly having to work at it, but she does it. That's a big improvement over before. But this is where Mako comes, because he's looking for Bolin, and his first thought is, well, Bolin has a crush on Korra. Maybe he has gone over there. And so there's a fun, a really great fun bit of physical comedy where Iki and Jinora, the Tenzin's daughters, are teasing Korra. Is like, oh, is that the firebender you like? Does he drive you crazy because you like him? And but then Korra does this really fast sort of earthbending thing to like shoot them away as Mako is coming up, so he won't hear them. And it's just a great little physical bit of comedy. Obviously, describing it doesn't do it justice, but it's very funny in context. And of course, we know that it doesn't have to be completely cartoony in logic, because there are benders they can safely land, and we in fact see them do so, giggling to themselves in the background. And so, but here's where we establish, wait, Bolin's not here? Then neither of us know where he is. Oh, where's my camera? All right. If he's not here, then where is he? Gosh, this is, you know, a mystery. Maybe we ought to go look for him. Little dog down there. So they go look for him, and I think it's interesting that we're not shown any of the stuff that happens there at the Triple Triad base. But, you know, well, I guess first we have the scene at the train station where we're learning a little bit about Mako and Bolin's backstory as a result of this whole mystery, right? Because we discover like, oh, they know all the kids that are just running around the train station clearly without parents, and kind of getting into trouble and running scams and stuff. And in fact, the kid's like, oh, I might know something, holds out the hand for. And Mako pays him for the information. But we also, like, part of what we learn there is that, like, this is a whole little network. They all know each other because that really used to be what Mako and Bolin did. Like, when their parents were killed, they were orphans. They were on the streets. And, that's, I think, it's nice to build that in. It makes it feel real before we actually learn the details of the story. We knew a little bit of that. But paying for that information, and so what we learn is, there's a turf war. He's probably with the triads, and so, they're going to check that out. But, of course, the triads have already been attacked by the equalists. And we catch, Mako and Korra arrive just as the truck is driving away. We see Bolin inside. There's a little bit of a coincidence in the fact that they're just long enough and the truck's driving away with the door open and they happen to see Bolin in there. But it's fine. It's fine. So, my little dog. But here's where we get a really cool action sequence. And we see that these new henchmen of Amon's are not just scary uniforms. They are very cool with their motorcycles and their smoke grenades, and apparently they're chi blocking. Now, if it's been a while since you saw The Last Airbender, it's forgivable to misremember that we did get introduced to chi blocking in that show. Ty Lee, Azula's friend, used to do it, and it used to be just her. So I think that's another cool way of establishing in this new world building the, just the continual raising of the stakes. Like, it ties into this idea that lightning bending, which used to just be this really advanced technique that only the best of the firebenders could ever master. But now it's like, no, it's a blue-collar job. You go and you work a shift down at the power station. Or if you're really good at it, Rocket, what are you barking about? Little dog. Or if you're really good, maybe you become a crime boss. Lightning bolt Zolt and all. And, but now the chi blocking is such a cool, obviously, Rocket, no, quiet, little dog. I'm trying to recap an episode of Legend of Korra. And what he's mad about, let me be clear, is that the plastic cover of a single serving cup of fruit cocktail, he was trying to chew on it, but it slipped underneath the little enclosure and he couldn't get at it. And that's what he was wanting. So he has chosen a new chew target. So what we needed was for these non-bending bad guys to have something that made them a threat, right? So we can see some of it is technology. They've got the motorcycles, the grenades, but also chi blocking and making them able to sort of mete out that justice. And it's, or that type of physical threat. And it's nicely dovetails with what Amon's whole deal is, right? Like, they're taking the bending away temporarily with the chi blocking. But it wears off after a little bit. And so, but in any event, they're able to escape. Mako and Korra lose the chase. And this is where we have them say, well, we lost the trail, but we can't stop looking. And so they're just wandering the city all night. And it's just some great backgrounds of establishing the city and all the various different places in it, seeing it all on overnight in kind of this misty evening. And then eventually they go back to the park because the only lead is that equalist guy that she met in the first episode. And this is where we learn from Mako the whole backstory of how a firebender, killed their parents. And, this is where, we get a sense of, well, yeah, the reason Bolin would have known those guys in the gang is because Mako and Bolin used to do some work for the gang. And Korra is initially a little bit, self-righteous about like, what? How could you? Those are bad guys. But, Mako basically makes the point like, we were on the streets with nothing. What are we supposed to do? We had to survive. We did what we had to do. But what's also interesting about that origin is that it overlaps with Amon's story, right? Amon tells the story of a firebender who killed his family and left his face scarred. And, we also, we remember Zuko's scar. And so like that, I think it's intended to evoke an element of that. And also the parallel between that and Mako and Bolin, and just say like, now imagine if we have, it's already tragic with Mako and Bolin, but imagine that when they lost their parents to a bender, that they were not themselves benders. Isn't it so much easier to imagine that you could develop this hatred of bending? Now, because this is a rewatch, we know that there's some complexities in what's going on there, but we get it, right? Like we can, we listen to Amon tell this speech, like when they finally, they confront the equalist protester, and he continues to be an asshole about it. And it's, again, there's this nuance to it, because on the one hand, certainly we're very much on the side of wanting to go save Bolin from these people. And we can also say that they shouldn't be kidnapping and taking the bending away from people. But it's also true, when this protester guy is just like, well, if your friend is a bender and he's in trouble, then he probably deserves it. From his perspective, what he's thinking is the people that are being taken are these gang members that oppress people. They're not grabbing randos off the street. They're grabbing the triads, these gangs that are hurting people. And the truth is that even though we know Bolin's not like that, he was there and was maybe going to take a job where that was going to happen, right? So while we know Bolin's not a bad guy, we could also see it from the other side of, oh yeah, well, if he's not a bad guy, what was he doing with those other bad people, right? So in any event, he's still a jerk. Mako and Korra have to retreat in the face of the police because, frankly, from a lawful perspective, they are the ones harassing someone in the park. And then, they figure out the clue of the posters. They decide to infiltrate this rally, and it's alarmingly big. There's a lot of people there, and I think that we're meant to sort of gasp in surprise when we see the reveal of the size of the crowd. But of course, they get in, and we get to hear the whole villain speech from Amon, and then the demonstration of removing someone's bending permanently. Now, again, tying back to The Last Airbender, we recall that is what Aang did to Fire Lord Ozai, and in the big climax, is he took his bending away. But that was this whole big deal thing that required the avatar state and everything, right? And so the idea that someone who is not the avatar, theoretically not even a bender, how could he do it? Well, what Amon says is that the spirits granted him that gift. Well, we'll see, right? And, but in the meantime, though, the idea that Bolin's bending would be taken away does feel like a really scary threat. Like, it's something that does make our hearts sort of skip a beat for these characters a little bit, because part of the fun of a show like this is just imagining ourselves as these empowered individuals, right? And to take the powers away is terrifying, and yet we can also say, when you take a moment to think of it from the equalist point of view, is like, oh yeah, how awful to be made just an ordinary person like the rest of us. that's this thing you're so scared of, is being normal like we are. And so again, it's like, well, you can see that I think it's clever writing that makes the villains nuanced in that regard. But of course, we get some nice action where, Korra is sent off um, to create steam as a diversion. Let's talk also about when it's just a neat bit of detail of when Amon is, first of all, he is subduing these captives himself. Like, I mean, on the one hand, his henchmen went and brought them on stage handcuffed, but then he takes them on, and like as far as demonstration is concerned, like that's got to be impressive. It's like he's not making his henchmen beat up these people first. He's getting in there, but when he's taking lightning bolt Zolt's powers away, you see that incredibly powerful bolt of lightning start to falter, and then eventually turns back to fire, and then that fades too. It's just a very cool effect. And then we get some nice detail with Mako sort of highlighting that the scarf is of sentimental importance. But then Korra borrows it for her disguise to cover her face, but then it ends up being useful in combating the guy with the wrench backstage. And it's just good stuff where, we have, a nice little action sequence there. We get a nice villain moment of Amon as he looks around, seeing that all the steam is going, and is like, okay, time for me to peace out. Let my henchmen kind of do the rest. But I don't know what's happening here. I need to withdraw. But we get this is where we get some action from Amon's like number one lieutenant, the guy with the the long mustache and the electrified little sticks, and he's fighting, and he's beating up Mako and Bolin. No place for benders anymore. But this is where Korra manages to get the drop on him, take him out. Mako and Bolin are rescued. Hooray! But we finished the episode not on happiness that yay we saved our friend, but rather Korra going back to Tenzin and saying, I saw him take someone's bending away. And Tenzin reiterates, only Avatar Aang was able to do that. And it's like, why? But I saw it happen. So what does that mean? They're out there. They have a lot of support. They're skilled. They have tools at their disposal. And now apparently they can take people's bending away. No bender is safe. Bum, bum, bum. So now with these 3 episodes, we have firmly established, like a primary through-line threat for the season. All our main characters are introduced. We've got one more who's going to join the team coming up. I'm trying to remember exactly which episode she shows up in, but we'll see. We'll get there. In the meantime, next week we'll talk about episode 4, The Voice in the Night. And in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.